Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining. I just have to say before I really dig into it, it's so nice to see so many familiar and also new faces in the chat. Anyway, without further ado, welcome to Think Like an Architect's very first live episode. This is a new series that I'm super excited about, and it is about the Salesforce architect team sharing concrete approaches to tackling all kinds of problems that Salesforce architects and professionals face in their day-to-day. These approaches are going to be coming from both our lived experience, but also we're going to be enlisting the help of seasoned experts along the way. My name is Miriam McCabe, and I'm the Senior Director and also the leader of the Architect Evangelism team at Salesforce. And I'm also a Salesforce CTA. In today's episode, I'll be walking you through how I think like an architect. And I'll do that by taking you through the 3 steps that I usually follow to tackle any architectural challenges that come my way. The steps are deceivingly simple, but they're highly effective. And they come from 20 plus years of experience as an architect. And I also use some of the strategies that I learned while I was preparing for the CTA exam as well. You can use those steps yourself to help approach difficult business problems and also prepare to have the right level of conversation, maybe with a business stakeholder or with other architects. Joining me will be an additional expert, my colleague in professional services, Scott Ratliff, who has been solving the challenge that we'll be looking at today for the past 2 months. It's going to be, as you've seen, live moderation throughout the episode, so please keep adding your questions and comments to the chat. Doesn't matter if it's about the approach or the solution details. And with that, I'm going to be switching to sharing mode. And so, Think Like an Architect. Episode number 1 is going to be about grounding Agentforce in dynamic external documentation. And before I dig into the content, it wouldn't be a Salesforce episode if I didn't tell you and showed you the forward-looking statement. So please remember to make any purchasing decision based on generally available products and services. And with that out of the way, let me take you through the agenda. I'll start by taking you through the 3 steps that I'll be referring to as what, how, and why approach. After that, we'll use that approach to examine a specific challenge while I also live diagram the solution. And as mentioned throughout the episode, there's room for Q&A, so please be forthcoming with all your questions and comments in the chat so that we can talk about the solution and the approach in more detail. So, the 3-step approach. These are the thinking steps that I take as an architect to tackle any architectural problem. And like I said, they look deceivingly simple. What, how, and why. But I'll take you through them and hopefully be able to share with you throughout the episode why they're so powerful. So starting with the what, which is arguably the most important step. Why is it so important? Well, how can you solve for a requirement that you don't really understand? And so in the what step, we'll be going through a business requirement and try to break it down into high-level requirements by highlighting key phrases in that business requirement. Once we have the high-level requirements, we'll take them and use them in the how step to align solutions to solve these requirements holistically. And with holistically, I mean requirements communicate. So they can be contradictory, or they can be one requirement may give more detail about another requirement. So I might group some of the requirements together, and while we then solve these requirements, I'll be taking notes of any questions, assumptions, and decisions, and visualize it in a diagram as I go along. Then, last but not least, the why step. Why is important because this is how we're able to justify our solutions to others. For example, stakeholders, but it could also be other architects. And let's not forget our future selves, right? The assumptions, questions we ask ourselves, and the decisions we take, some of that detail gets lost over time. And having an architectural decision record for those will save us a lot of headache. in the future. And with that, I'm going to start with the business requirement. And before I drill into this business requirement and start highlighting, a note on the tools that I'm using. Some of you might be recognizing them already. This is Lucid Spark. It's a tool that I use for ideation, and I want to use it because it's going to allow me to highlight the text, which is an approach that I love to do. And then I'll also be using Lucid Chart for diagramming, using the Salesforce shapes that are available in Lucid Chart. But let's start with the business requirement. And what I'll do is I'll go through sentence by sentence and then highlight the words, the keywords of interest. Let's begin. So we have thousands of product files in PDF, in HTML format that are managed outside of Salesforce. So what is important for me here is the number, the volume, the format, of course, of interest, because there's limitations and considerations around format pretty much at all times. And then the fact that they're managed outside of Salesforce is going to be of importance as well. If I go to the next sentence, the content of these files needs to be used by Agentforce to answer customer questions. So this introduces an important detail, pretty much that we're going to have to be using Agentforce, apologies, and that will be answering customer questions. In the next sentence, the files are updated regularly, so the solution must always use the most current version. This is bringing in the timeliness and the freshness of the content aspect, which is, of course, going to be a key requirement for making some of those design decisions along the way. Next sentence, these files should be stored in a way that Agentforce can reference and read to generate answers. So pretty much the most important thing for me here is that we need to come up with a storage solution, right? I think everything else around being able to answer, it's already covered. And that is common, right? A business requirement is a business requirement. It can be verbose, it can have repetition, and I will not surprise you if I say that sometimes it will even have contradictions. Last but not least, the last sentence, a customer question may be answered by content in specific files and then shift to another question that relies on content in other files. And the solution has to support this. So pretty roundabout way, but nevertheless, who am I to judge, right? To say that we want to have relevant content that is answering the question. So I'm highlighting specific files and other files. So now I feel that I have a pretty good understanding of the high-level business requirement. And with that, let's have a look at the ones that I prepared. So number one, Agentforce must be able to access unstructured data managed outside of Salesforce, and that data comes in PDF and HTML format. Check. Number two, updates to the data need to be immediately reflected in the answers that the agent provides. Understood? And we can already see that that kind of is a further precision almost of both requirement 1 and 2. And then requirement number 3, the Agentforce agent must be able to answer questions using the relevant data across all the files in a single conversation. And I promised that we would attack those requirements holistically. So what I see here is that requirement 1 and 2 are really very much about getting the data, making the data available to Agentforce, and then making sure that it's fresh enough, so that the agent is always accessing the most relevant data. And then the third one is really about the internal workings, let's say, of Agentforce and how it's going to be answering those questions. You may, when you look at requirement 3, think, hey, but there are words there. She's using words that were not in the original business requirement. And that is true. I added the word relevant, and I also added the word single conversation. And the reason I'm doing that is because it's typically a good practice to paraphrase the requirement to ensure that when you read this back to your business stakeholder, to ensure that there is a shared understanding. All right, without any further ado, as I mentioned, I'm going to be tackling requirement 1 and 2 together so that I can come up with a holistic solution. And as I look at these requirements, the first assumption that I'm already making in my head is that this is going to be leveraging data 360. And before I tell you why I take that assumption, let me just explain what I'm doing here. So I have questions, assumptions, and decisions. These are the 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 things that I want to highlight as I think through the solution, so that I can keep track of them for the decision recording. So data 360. The reason I want to go for data 360, and let me actually just draw that out for you here. I prepared a few diagram components to make that a little bit easier. Oh, and let me start by pasting in a Salesforce org. To me, that is such let's say, a given that I'm not even going to record that as an assumption. But what I am doing is, and I'm assuming that I'm going to be using data 360. And the reason for this is that this is the best way to be exposing unstructured data to Salesforce in a way that Agentforce can use it to answer questions. There's functionality around vector databases that we're going to be using here. The reason that I'm also convinced that it's going to be data 360 is that no matter even if I go for a very much out of the box solution, such as knowledge or data libraries, behind the scenes, those are also going to be relying on data 360. So what I'll do is I'll bring those in as well. Let me just paste in a service. And what I'm also doing is I'm taking already the unstructured data that I want to get in. Now, as I was talking and drawing, you notice that I already made some assumption and asked myself some questions. So the assumption, data 360, pretty much became a decision as well, right? And I also asked myself the question, should we be using knowledge? Could we be using knowledge? It's such a good idea to always start from out of the box solutions and then work your way through them. And the way that I like to do it is I like to kind of prove to myself that I'm not able to use it. And if I can't prove that to myself, then it means that is actually the best solution. So anyway, so the questions that I'm asking myself, could I use knowledge? And could we maybe make use of a data library? So let's go back to the diagram. As I want to think about migrating this unstructured data to knowledge, I can immediately almost feel like some resistance rising in my architect gut. And this is because I'm realizing that I'm now making the assumption that the data needs to stay where it is. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to take the assumption that the knowledge or the files need to stay in there. Let's assume for the moment there that they're in a CMS. Okay, so that means that I won't be able to do a one-off migration between the unstructured data and knowledge. So I'm capturing that as a decision. No one-off migration to knowledge. And I'm linking those as well for traceability, because we all know if assumptions change, then decisions will probably change as well. This means that we need to bring in something in between. So let me make a little bit of room here and paste in, for example, MuleSoft. This could work theoretically. We could have the unstructured data update, create some kind of event that MuleSoft would pick up, and it would then do a lot of transformation and logic, and then ingest it into knowledge. Well, I do feel a little bit of resistance here as well, because I think everybody who's ever tried to migrate data into knowledge understands how complex it is to keep the formatting and the images in the right place. So I'm not immediately convinced. But before I take a final decision, I do want to think about, if I have it in knowledge, what would that actually mean for the overall solution? Just having the data in knowledge doesn't actually make it available to the agent in Agentforce. So even if I had it in knowledge, I would have to either bring it in through a data library. And this is interesting because bringing it in through a data library will give us a 24 hours refresh rate. So I'm going to remember that for a second, just draw out the rest of the solution and then go back into the assumptions and questions piece of this. So from here, this is how it would go. So it would go data, MuleSoft, knowledge, every 24 hours via the data library into the DLO. At this point, I'm thinking this is starting to become a pretty convoluted solution, and I'm not liking it. But I'm not ruling out knowledge yet. There is, in fact, also another option, which would be to bring that knowledge into Data Cloud using, Data 360 using the CRM connector. Advantage of that is that it would have a 15-minute refresh rate. So now I have quite a lot of information to capture in my questions, assumptions, and decisions tracker. So what I'm going to be assuming is that a 24-hour refresh rate is not enough. And I'm also going to assume, for the sake of argument, but of course, like all these assumptions, I'll be checking those with the business when I present my solution to them, right? I'm going to assume that even the 15-minute refresh is not okay. Is that already enough to say that it shouldn't be knowledge? Well, I do have one more, if you'll humor me, although I'm already going to capture the decision here because it's starting to look like I don't want to use knowledge. But there is one additional consideration. If we take if we manage the data in the source where it lives and we keep it there and we migrate it temporarily or periodically or whenever it changes into knowledge and then expose it back into Agentforce through data libraries or the CRM connector, whenever the agent is going to be using citations, it's going to base those citations. And for everybody who's like, what's a citation? Citations, I mean, is where the agent will put a link in the answer to where it's basing its answer on. So those citations are actually going to be going and referring to the knowledge, whereas the source of truth is living here. So that is also not ideal. So that's the last piece of the puzzle in my head, why I'm saying citations should be to source. And so all of these are enough for me to kind of decide that I don't want to use knowledge. So that question is answered. Now there is also the data library. So let me just go into the data library. We've already established, and let me actually also remove the solutions that I don't like. I'm taking this out. Now, data library, to use a data library from the unstructured data directly would pretty much mean a manual upload. And I'm not liking that. In the interest of accuracy, what I'll do is this would actually mean that the unstructured data would stay unstructured and would end up in a UDLO in Data Cloud, in Data 360. But I'm already really not liking the manual aspect here. So I'm going to also decide that it's not going to be, hold on, let me just put it like that. That it's not going to be a data library. And my assumption here is that manual refresh is not acceptable. And then I'll link that assumption into that decision as well. So now pretty much going back to this architecture diagram, the way that it looks is that pretty much the only viable option that remains is to go and bring that unstructured data into Data 360 in some way directly. And there's a few options here, but the main question that comes up in my head right now is, and I'll add that to the question, is now it becomes really kind of crucial to understand the source system. So I've added that in as a question. And why is that important? Well, depending on the actual nature of the system, there may or there may not be a CRM connector for it. Well, we all know the refresh limitations for the CRM connector, so we're already not sure if that's going to be a viable solution. The other option would be to bring it in via MuleSoft. And so I'm going to bring in, and this is the solution that's going to give us the most freedom. The way it would work is an event would be published whenever the data is updated. MuleSoft would be able to capture that and then bring the data in. And the reason I'm putting the link to DLO or UDLO is depending on the nature of the transformation that would take place in MuleSoft, it would maybe not be that unstructured anymore, or it would be unstructured. In any case, we would be able to use the ingestion API, and that would give us a refresh rate of around 3 minutes. So this is pretty much, I think, the closest that we're able to get to immediate updates of the data. So what I'm going to do in my recording of all of this is I'm going to take a decision that it's either going to be the connector or MuleSoft. And based on what I currently know, I won't be able to take it any further than this. So this is what I'll take along in any discussion with the stakeholder moving forward. This wraps up my thinking process around requirement 1 and 2. And that means that I'll now take us through requirement number 3. And requirement number 3, I think, is almost a lot simpler. We have some givens, right, which I'll take put in as a decision. So Agentforce is pretty much a given here. And what is also a given is that the best way to connect this data into the agent is via a prompt template with a retriever. And so in the interest of completeness, let me copy in Agentforce to finalize this. So the way that it would work is the retriever would be the thing that takes the data out of Data 360 and makes it available to Agentforce via a prompt template. So this would mean that the action would have access to a prompt template, and the action would be what the reasoning engine gets to as it's reasoning between all the available topics and instructions, and then the available actions. And then to close the loop, this would then allow an end user asking questions and then getting the right answers. So this is the comprehensive solution. But do I really not have any questions anymore? Of course I do. There's always more questions to ask. And the last question that I'm asking myself here is, are there any visibility constraints? Meaning, are there scenarios where we have to be absolutely sure that only data that resides in specific files can be used to answer a specific set of questions? Or is there data that it shouldn't be made available to the agent? If that is the case, we might need to go for a prompt template with one or more custom retrievers. So with that, this is wrapping up the how section. The last thing that remains of the methodology here is the why. And for the why, in this episode, what I want to share with you is that my colleague, David Norris has created a blog and a video on how to use AI to create architectural decision records. And it's really good. I tried it out using a version of the data that we created here. I took a PNG, uploaded it into Gemini using some of the prompts that are in that blog, and I thought that the results were really good. Maybe for another blog or for you to try yourself. Um, for me, what I would like to do right now is I would like to bring my colleague, Scott Ratliff, technical architect director, into the call and dive into some Q&A. So welcome, Scott.
Hey, great to be here.
Good to see you. Would you like to briefly introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, sure. My name's Scott Reliff. I'm a technical architect director. I've been at Salesforce for just over 7 years. Most of my knowledge, when I came in was MuleSoft based, but the last 3 years I've been more agent AI and data cloud focused or data 360 focused.
Perfect. Really good. Yeah. And so if you see me looking like this, I'm just trying to taking a look at the chat and scrolling through the questions. And so the first question that I would like to ask you is around using intelligent context. Have you considered intelligent context, and would that be applicable here?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on the data that you're pulling in, right? Because that there are some restrictions on intelligent context that may or may not be applicable based on the data you're pushing into the agent. The one thing to say is it does do a better job of maybe than straight unstructured data, because you can provide it like intelligence to filter or change that data so that it's more applicable to the use case you're using for your agent. But like at this point, it's PDFs and images, and there are size limitations on the intelligent context side. So ideally, if you can use it, I would absolutely recommend it. But you have to get the awareness of that data that you're trying to process.
Yeah, and it has to be absolutely right, right? So if it's
Hmm.
not just images, or then
Yep.
then it's probably not going to work. Excellent. All right. So I have another question here. Should we also think about how the question would make us decide between what type of agent to use? Like, should it be an employee agent or a service agent or whatever? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's to the use case, right? So like employee agents would be great for if you have a Slack agent or if you have a Salesforce on the back end agent. If you have a service agent, if you're answering questions that our customers are providing in from like a website, your service agent's going to be a little bit better just because it doesn't depend on who's using the Salesforce side, because it uses a service account. For the employee agent, again, it all ties down to the data and what you're trying to ask the agent.
Understood. Um, I have a nice one here around MuleSoft. How would MuleSoft detect that a new file version was added or a new file was uploaded to trigger the ingestion into the UDLO?
Okay, that's a good question. So again, it comes down to the data that you're pushing in. For instance, Google Drive, you can set APIs, or MuleSoft has a on new file or on updated file trigger that happens, and so you'd build that in for MuleSoft if you want to go that route. There's also something called MuleSoft Direct for like Google, and for I think there's one for SharePoint too. In both of those cases, they have built-in capabilities, and what's kind of nice. It's already a pre-built MuleSoft module, and so you could use those, and they also have those capabilities in there. Outside of like Google Drive and SharePoint, I guess the other ways to look at it would be like more of like a batch job to kind of come in there, or if it's a different type of directory, checking to see if the API has the ability to trigger based off of new or updated files.
All right. And on that, so would it change anything if we were to have both knowledge and unstructured files?
Well, that's the unstructured route. You definitely want to go through what you've talked about, Miriam, and I think The interesting thing is if you have multiple sources of data that come in for the agent to use, there's a couple ways to handle it. I've actually done a couple of prompts where I've had multiple retrievers just come in, and so I just ask them both. And then there's circumstances you want to do it that way, but I would highly recommend, if possible, to use the ensemble retriever capability, which allows you to do a single retriever with multiple search indexes. And so that way it's one call out. It's, behind the scenes, the Data 360 makes both calls, but from the retriever standpoint, it looks like it's just one set of data that's coming back.
Ensemble retriever. That's a nice one to keep in mind.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like Avengers or something, So it must be very
Yeah.
powerful.
Ensemble. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm seeing a couple of questions around, let's say, more the scenario, right? And they're asking like, are the documents customer specific, standards, or procedures? And I guess there's a couple of ways to answer that. So I think the first thing that I would like to say is, in the interest of time, I know that I'm not going into all the details of the use case, right? So for the moment, on that, I'm going to probably say that it could be everything. What I like about the rest of the question, though, is where it says, but what if we had specific standards or procedures for specific customers? Like, how would that change the solution? And I think that kind of goes somewhat to the way of that filtering, right? And that visibility
Yeah.
that I mentioned at the end. So what are your thoughts on that, Scott?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, I'm dealing with that exact issue at the moment, and the fun thing about it is there's every architect, right? It depends on how you want to handle it. So there's a couple of ways to think about it. So like if you're going the unstructured data route with a connector, you get like really limited filtering capabilities on the search index, just because the way the metadata that comes in from the unstructured data doesn't necessarily lend itself to like what directory it was pushed into, or if there's a tree of directories. And so there could be some problems with using the data directly as it is. A couple of things to kind of bring up though is the way around that with the connector would be to just have multiple connector uses. So like for this directory, I want to do this. Becomes really manual, becomes really kind of problematic. One of the other areas to do, and this is kind of where you had mentioned that MuleSoft gives us the most flexibility, and so with that, we could do like pre-processing. So something comes in, I know it's in a certain directory, I know it's talking about a certain customer, or maybe something in there is giving me then intelligence based on the content of the file itself. I can, with MuleSoft, I can do like a data stream ingestion, ingest API versus like a an unstructured data one. And with that, I can then now take some of that data, make it structured, give myself some filtering capabilities that I may not have had directly using the data. And so, there's some drawbacks to doing that as well, which probably would be a whole other discussion. But we could, you could do something like along those lines to get that in there. And then once you have that, you can have your custom retriever actually have a dynamic filter. So you could say, oh, for this project or for this customer, only look at these directories. But if the easier way to do it, I guess, or not easier, but from a development standpoint, a more simpler way would be like really forcing file naming conventions on the unstructured data. But that becomes, a problem on the other side.
Yeah, I guess there's some risks involved there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we also have a couple of questions around, let's say, the 3-step approach. So there's also a comment here that says, trying to prove oneself wrong is a very helpful exercise. So thank you for that. I love doing that. It's almost just as nice as proving someone else wrong, right? Anyway, so there's a question here around, when we finish the steps, what is the best way to cover all of these questions and decisions and present them to the business? Is the lucid chart that we have built enough? And I think that is such a good question. And I think the answer in true architect style is going to be, it depends, right? It's going to depend on the type of company, the type of stakeholders, their expectations. I would hope that bringing in the solution, presenting the the data that we generated, right? The assumptions, decisions, etc. Maybe in a slide would be enough. But of course, there could be, let's say, I don't know, additional considerations around, like, I don't know, having to use nice pictures or whatever, right? Really kind of depends on the company. But what it is enough for, I think, is the thinking work has been done, and is substantial. Now, there is also a question here that says, let me go here. Why do you have the why all the way at the end? Don't we also need a why at the beginning? And I love that, because of course we do. And there is a reason, I think, that we typically, or folks can sometimes talk about 5 whys, right? I think you cannot ask why often enough. The reason I put it here at the end is because I wanted to talk about recording those decisions for our stakeholders and for our future selves. And in this scenario, I'm assuming that the work to challenge the business, build the business case, has already been done, right? So that the business requirement that we started from has already had some whys thrown at it. Let me just see. I think this is a question, I think, to me, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Scott. It says, in the solution diagram, why was the prompt template shown inside the Service 360 box and not as an element within the Agentforce box? Maybe I just messed it up. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to me it could be like how you represent it, right? But it is, you could almost put it into his Agentforce and do prompt templates, I guess. But it also could be tied to what cloud you're in or agent you're using.
I suppose. I guess what I'm trying to say is, and this is the reason I wanted to flag it here as well, is like, it's a drawing, right? And the nice thing about Lucid is that I can just drag the box around, and then it's in another box. But thank you for bringing that up. I have another really one that I think you're going to like, Scott. So there should be a discussion around the chunking strategy. Talk to us about chunking.
So yeah, by default, you really, with UDMOs and unstructured data, you don't get a lot of like flexibility in the chunking strategy. I think that is another area where intelligent context like kind of shows its use. With that, the chunking strategy is based a little bit more on the prompt that has been used to develop the intelligent context. And so with that, you have some flexibility over what the chunking strategy is. By default, it's the 512 chunks, separating by paragraph. And what I've experienced with just using the unstructured data directly is you don't necessarily get cohesive points in what the agent returns, and sometimes the answers that the agent returns with are not as good. Intelligent context makes it a little better, though.
Any recommendations on like what?
It depends.
No, that's not allowed.
No, I know, but like, I mean, realistically, like I said, if and I think it kind of goes down to what you're saying. It's like, let's think about the out of box solutions and then see if those work for us, and then kind of make it more customized as we find that these solutions don't necessarily match up. Like for instance, let's say we're processing more than PDFs. We got documents, we got other things in there, videos or whatever. It may not be like useful to use intelligent context because of some of those restrictions. At that point, and if the answers are still not coming from agents correctly, I think the pre-processing approach becomes a really viable alternative. It's like, what does the content that I'm pulling in mean? And what's great about it is you get a little bit more flexibility, and you can have multiple prompts. So first prompt is like digesting the information and spitting out something, maybe like focusing on who the audience is, or maybe focusing on what kind of pieces of information you want to pull out of that one. But then you have like additional capabilities to use prompts for like organization or for just additional processing, and I think at that point it gets the possibilities become a lot more broad, but you're paying the price by doing more customized work.
Yeah, gotcha. Another question here. So what about deletion of UDLO content when information, say a file, is deleted from the source repository? How would that work? Would it
Well,
work?
yeah, that's a good question. I'm not exactly sure how it would work with all the different types of connectors that are out there, but some of them would do. It would recognize that that file changed, and then because there's like a link, for lack of a better word, a tie from the data structure to the actual UDLO, and it may go through and it may have the ability to delete. But I don't think that's the case for every connector that's out there. And for MuleSoft, obviously, it gets a little bit more interesting because, like I said, it does like new or updated file. I don't know. I'm not even sure if there's a trigger for like on deleted file. And so I think that has something to, again, it ties back to like what is that source of data and what kind of capabilities we have. Lacking like actual real time capabilities, highly recommend. Maybe some sort of like batch process that runs weekly, and it kind of goes through and says, here are all the file links that I have. Here are all the file links that are out there. Are there differences? And then run deletes.
Okay.
I think some of them actually, like I want to say, some of them have like some of the connectors have that capability already. They do like incremental throughout the week or the day, and then on some sort of regular basis, there's a full refresh.
Okay. All right. There's a question here that says, I also saw clients mostly have and store documents in AWS. Would a solution, how would the solution that we kind of drew on the board change if we were to have those documents in AWS?
If they're S3 buckets, the unstructured data processes on S3 buckets as well. Again, it comes down to the metadata that comes across with it.
And does that mean like
so,
using a connector, like
yeah, you can
out of
use
the box
a direct,
connector?
yeah, out of box connector. The big
Gotcha.
thing there is, again, whatever metadata you get out of the S3 buckets is kind of what you have for filtering and for additional processing.
Are there any platform features and limits that we need to be mindful of as we're designing this?
Yeah, definitely. For instance, like the unstructured data by itself has higher limits than intelligent context. So when you look at if you're looking to use intelligent context, you have to make sure like a lot of the files are not, some of the very big files are kind of contained. And then like just to even build the intelligent context, kind of the sample, I guess, and where you can kind of tweak the prompt. Those files you can't go over 10 meg, and you can't have more than 5 files. And so just to kind of seed the intelligent context, it's kind of very structured. And you also want to provide like variations of the files. So if you have like, I don't know, like a product specification PDF, which may be bigger and have more words, but you may also have like something that's like have more images or something like that, which is going to blow the size of the PDF. But so take that into account. But definitely as you're looking through the solution, size limits and number of rows limits should be applied.
Okay, excellent. So I'm gonna do one last question, and that is on the boxes in the Lucid chart. So I just thought it'd be important for folks to know. So the question was, did you import any libraries to bring the various boxes that you used into Lucid chart? And the answer is yes. The standard Salesforce diagram shapes. Of course, I pre-prepared them, right, to look like to serve my purpose, but the building blocks are all there. And so with that, I'm going to be wrapping it up. Just bring you back because I want to share some resources with you. And so the resources that I prepared here for you is the blog post that I referenced on architectural decisions and how to leverage AI together with, for example, the content that we created on the call today. You can use the link here. Then please share your feedback. This was the very first episode, and I cannot tell you how happy I am that so many of you joined and said hi. It really means a lot. And what would mean even more is if you were to share your feedback, good or bad, and especially tell us what topics you would like us to tackle next. And speaking of the next, save the date. Tune in February 19th, little bit over a month from now, same time, same channel, for the second episode. And with that, thank you so much, Scott,
Thank you
for your
for
expertise
having
and
me.
sharing that with us. Really appreciate it. And also thank you all for attending. Goodbye.